Okay, so when you start a new job, right? You sign a contract, it's got your pay, your hours, all the official stuff. But what about all the unwritten rules? You know, the promise of growth, the expectation of loyalty, that feeling of fairness. That's the invisible handshake, and it truly defines your relationship with an employer. And believe me, it's changing faster than ever.
So let's just start with a really fundamental question. What is the real deal you're making with your employer? Is it just, I give you my time, you give me a paycheck? Or is there something, deeper going on? This question right here is at the absolute heart of everything we're about to get into.
All right, so the answer to that big question lies in this idea called the psychological contract. Think of it like the unofficial, unwritten agreement between you and your company. It isn't legally binding or anything, but it pretty much governs everything from how motivated you feel to how loyal you are. It's powerful, it's fragile, and it all happens in the world of perception.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to break down what these unwritten rules actually are. Then, we'll look at the different kinds of these contracts you might run into. After that, we'll dive into how the modern world of work is just shaking everything up, what happens when these invisible promises get broken, and finally, how you can actually navigate this new world and come out on top.
All right, let's get right to the core of it. What exactly makes up this invisible handshake? It's way more than just a vague feeling. It's a real framework that shapes our entire professional lives. Now, what's so fascinating is how the organizational scholar Denise Rousseau puts it. She calls it a deal in the mind. And that phrase is perfect because it highlights that this whole thing is completely subjective. I mean, think about it. You might expect your boss to be a mentor, guiding you toward a promotion, but your boss might just see your job as, get these tasks done. That's a classic mismatch in the deal in the mind, and it's a recipe for frustration.
Okay, so it turns out not all of these deals in the mind are created equal. They pretty much fall into two major categories, and these categories really define the kind of relationship you have with your job. Figuring out which one you're in, that's absolutely crucial. So the big difference is between something called a transactional contract and a relational contract. A transactional one, it's all business. It's a specific economic exchange, short-term, narrow. A relational contract, on the other hand, is much more open-ended. It's a long-term thing, and it includes a much broader social exchange, stuff like loyalty and support.
Let's make this super clear. Imagine a freelance graphic designer. They get hired to make one logo, they deliver the logo, they get paid, that's it. The deal is done. That is purely transactional. Now, flip that script. Think about someone who joins a company right out of school hoping to spend the next 20 years climbing the ladder. They're basically trading their loyalty for the promise of long-term security and growth. That's a classic relational contract.
But here's where it gets interesting. A lot of modern jobs use what's called a balanced contract. It's a hybrid, really. It tries to take the best of both worlds. You get the promise of long-term growth from the relational side, but it's explicitly tied to clear performance goals, just like a transactional deal. For a company, it's a great way to motivate people. For you, it means growth is possible, but job security isn't just a given. It has to be earned over and over again. But these contracts don't exist in a bubble. They're being totally reshaped by some really powerful forces in the global economy. So let's look at three of the biggest game changers: outsourcing, offshoring, and of course, the explosion of remote work. First, let's just get our terms straight so we're all on the same page. Outsourcing is when a company hires another company to do something it used to do itself, like handling customer service. Now, offshoring is a specific type of outsourcing, where that work gets sent to a company in a totally different country, usually to cut costs or tap into a bigger talent pool.
And the scale of this is just immense. When a company decides to offshore, it's not just hiring a few people. It's plugging into a massive global workforce. And when you do that, you're creating a whole new set of psychological contracts, often with people you've never even met in person. That adds a whole new layer of complexity to that invisible handshake.
And if you're wondering why this is happening, well, one of the biggest drivers is pure economics. I mean, just look at this chart. A software developer in the US might earn a median wage of nearly $45 an hour. That same role in India, maybe around $8. For a company trying to manage costs, that difference is, well, it's impossible to ignore.
So what has this meant for the good old-fashioned office? In many cases, it's become optional. Technology has untethered us from our desks, and it's basically put this whole global workforce trend into hyperdrive. It's creating these virtual offices and making it easier than ever for companies to hire the best person for the job, no matter where on the planet they happen to live. So, what happens when these new, complex ways of working collide with our personal, unwritten expectations? Well, a lot of the time, the result is a deep sense of betrayal. Let's talk about what happens when the invisible handshake is broken.
58%. Just let that number sink in for a minute. More than half of all employees feel like their employer has gone back on their promises. This isn't some small niche problem. It's a massive crisis of trust in the workplace.
This feeling actually has a name. It's a psychological contract breach. And the key word here, once again, is perception. A breach happens when an employee feels like the company didn't hold up its end of the bargain. It doesn't matter if the promise was written in a legal document. What matters is the belief that a promise was made and then broken.
And the consequences of a breach are really severe. It creates this whole negative domino effect. First, trust just evaporates. Then, job satisfaction tanks. People get cynical and disengaged. And pretty soon, they're less motivated, their performance drops, and they're way more likely to just quit. It's a lose-lose for everyone.
Okay, so the landscape is definitely complex and the risks are real. But this isn't all doom and gloom. The real question is, how can we, as future employees and as future leaders, build healthier, more resilient psychological contracts in this new world of work?
Well, here's a clear strategy to think about. First, you have to rebuild trust through transparency. That means focusing on the quality of the work and the outcomes, not just on whether someone is physically sitting in an office. Second, you have to prioritize time for deep work, protecting people from all the constant digital noise. And third, companies need to start seeing things like outsourcing as a true partnership. Some people call it commerce with conscience, not just a sneaky way to cut costs.
Phew, okay, we've covered a ton of ground. From the invisible deal in your mind to the huge global forces that are reshaping our jobs. So now it's time to put your knowledge to the test. Let's see how well you've grasped this whole idea of the invisible handshake.
Okay, first question, which contract type is all about the long haul, focusing on things like loyalty and growth? Is it A, transactional, B, relational, C, balanced, or D, legal? The correct answer here is B, relational. It's not transactional because that's all about short-term tasks, and it's not balanced because that directly links that long-term growth to short-term performance.
All right, next up, a company moves its call center from the US to the Philippines to save money on labor. What is this an example of? A, outsourcing, B, offshoring, C, remote work, or D, reshoring? The best answer here is B, offshoring. Now, technically, it is a form of outsourcing, but offshoring is more specific because it points out that the work moved to another country, and that's the key detail in the question.
And finally, let's just end with a really big question for you to think about. As all the old foundations of work, like job security and just being physically present, start to fade, what does loyalty even mean anymore? In this new world of digital nomads and global teams, what's going to be the new glue that binds an employee to a company? That's the challenge for you to figure out as you go out and build your own career.